One of the issues that comes up about case method is the degree to which you might want to adjust the way you teach cases for different audiences. For example, if you're teaching MBA students, would you want to teach in a different way than you would from, say, undergraduates? Well, even among MBAs, there's a significant issue because some MBA students come directly out of undergraduate programs, others have 5 to 6 years experience, so that you could rely more on their experience for contributing to the richness of the discussion than you could, say, on a group of people who had come straight out of their MBA, of their undergraduate program, and therefore didn't have as much experience to draw on, were speaking mostly from a book learning or a theoretical point of view. So there are some nuances that we should pay attention to. If you're teaching practicing managers and MBA students in an executive program where they have full-time jobs and they're coming off of their full-time jobs for your educational experience, I think there one of the issues is that you want to utilize the experience they have as much as you possibly can. So if you know something about the students' backgrounds and you can ask this particular student, well, what's it like in the clothing industry compared with the computer industry, compared with automobile manufacturing, then you can utilize the richness of the experience in the room and allow it to enrich the class. Now, I think whether you have experienced students or not, case method is an excellent way of stimulating people to think, because you've got real problems in front of them, and the experienced managers will recognize those issues unless you've inadvertently chosen a case that doesn't fit the group that you've got in. And we've talked about that before. So if you're dealing then with a higher level group of people, executives, for example, in my experience, they have much less patience for theory. They typically have strong opinions because they've got more experience themselves, and in an executive audience, you're probably, in my experience, going to want to let them have more reign. That's not always the case, and there's a judgment call there. But so with an executive group, you might be more frequently asking, well, what's your opinion on this? What's your opinion on this? And frequently you don't have to ask because their hands are up because they have strong opinions. Now, if you've got an executive in a one-company program and everybody is deferential to that person's point of view, well, this goes back to the seminar design, the design of who's going to be coming to the seminar, whether or not you want to have conversation with the person in advance. It also requires sensitivity to the hierarchical nature or not of the culture of the company, so that you really want to have an open, honest, candid conversation. And in some companies that's very difficult, in other companies not so difficult because of the culture they have there. Dealing with executives, I find it's much more important to be open to their way of thinking, important to solicit their way of thinking. I try not to, if I disagree, say that straight out. I'll ask other people in the room, do they agree, disagree? We go back to that Chinese construction, yes, no. Is it good, is it bad, is it agreeable, disagreeable? And because most of them have strong opinions, they will tend to jump in and say, well, see, in my experience, it doesn't work that way. I look at it this way or I look at it that way. So there's a different tone in a group that's comprised primarily of executives. At the other end of the scale, if you think about undergraduates, they may or may not have as much experience as you would with an MBA or an EMBA or an executive group. So without that experience, they tend to rely a lot more on book learning, and they like to quote authors, they like to cite other people because maybe their opinions aren't so open. So one of the issues there I find is, can you continually ask them, well, what do you think about that? It's one thing to know what Aristotle said. It's another thing to have your own thoughts about whether or not you agree. And just because, whether it's Aristotle or Gandhi or Jack Welch, or you pick your favorite authority, just because somebody else did it doesn't necessarily mean that that was the right way to do it. So the goal again here for me is I want to stimulate people in the room to question their own values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations about the way the world works in the light of the context and in light of the issues that we're dealing with, and in so doing deepen and enrich and broaden their own cognitive and emotional skill sets for dealing with the issues that life presents them. If you take doctoral students, these are people who are studying the theory and supposedly all of the theory in a particular field so that they understand the history of the current set of ideas, where they came from, where they have strengths, where they have weaknesses, probably going to be using more primary sources from research. That said, I've taught a doctoral seminar on pedagogy for a third of a century, and I find that doctoral students, just like anyone else, are deeply engaged by the case method. The cases in this case might have to do with how you teach. So descriptions of educational situations in which there was a recalcitrant student. I've got one case where a student had his feet up on the desk every day, people who come in late, people who leave early, questions that are asked that are difficult. Chris Christensen at the Harvard Business School has developed a series of these cases, published them in a couple of books. We've done the same here at Darden. We have a whole series on pedagogy and higher administration cases that deal with the educational setting. So depending on what the focal point of your doctoral students might be, even if it's on a research stream rather than a pedagogical stream, I think case method is an excellent way to go about it. Cases might be an article that someone has written, and you pick that apart, but you can do that with a case method kind of structure. So case method may have some nuances depending on the audience that you're dealing with. In my experience, it's a remarkably flexible tool if the facilitator has taken some care in choosing the materials to fit the particular audience and the learning objectives that you have for them.